The Secret Doctrine by Elena Petrovna Blavatsky, a facsimile of the original edition of 1888, printed by the Cunningham Press, Alhambra, California. Book 2, Part 1, Anthropogenesis, stanzas translated with commentaries, from the Secret Book of John. Stanza 1, verse 2. Said the earth, Lord of the shining face, the sun, my house is empty. Send thy sons to people this wheel, earth. Thou hast sent thy 7 sons to the Lord of Wisdom. The Lord of Wisdom is Mercury, or Buddha. 7 times doth he see thee nearer to himself. 7 times more doth he feel thee. Thou hast forbidden thy servants, the small rings, to catch thy light and heat, thy great bounty to intercept on its passage. Send now thy servant the same. The modern commentary explains the words as a reference to a well-known astronomical fact, that Mercury receives 7 times more light and heat from the Sun than Earth, or even the beautiful Venus, which receives but twice that amount more than our insignificant globe. Whether the fact was known in antiquity may be inferred from the prayer of the Earth Spirit to the Sun as given in the text. The Sun, however, refuses to people the globe, as it is not ready to receive life as yet. Note, Copernicus wrote his theories on the revolution of the heavenly bodies in the 16th century, and the Zohar, even if compiled by Moses de Leon in the 13th century, states that, in the book of Hamanana, the old will learn that the earth turns upon itself in the form of a circle, that some are on top and others below, that there are some countries which are lightened whilst others are in darkness. These have the day when for the former it is night, and there are countries in which it is constantly day, or in which at least the night continues only some instants. Zohar 3, Vol 10a from Kabbalah, page 139. End of note. Mercury is, as an astrological planet, still more occult and mysterious than Venus. It is identical with the Mazdean Mithra, the genius or god established between the sun and the moon, the perpetual companion of the Sun of Wisdom. Pausanias shows him as having an altar in common with Jupiter, Book 5. He had wings to express his attendance upon the sun in its course, and he was called the Nuntis, or Sun Wolf, Solaris Luminis Particeps. He was the leader of and the evocator of souls, the great magician and the Hierophant. Virgil depicts him as taking his wand to evoke from Orcus the souls plunged therein. Tum virgam capit, hac animas ille evocat orco. See also the 21st Fargad of the Vendidad on the celestial militia. He is the golden-colored Mercury, the Cridophies Hermes, whom the Hierophants forbade to name. He is symbolized in Grecian mythology by one of the dogs, Vigilance, which watch over the celestial flock, occult wisdom, or Hermes Anubis, or again Agathodamon. He is the Argus watching over the earth, and which the latter mistakes for the sun itself. It is through the intercession of Mercury that the Emperor Julian prayed to the occult sun every night, for, as says Vossius, all the theologians agree to say that Mercury and the sun are one. He was the most eloquent and the most wise of all the gods, which is not to be wondered at, since Mercury is in such close proximity to the wisdom and the word of God, the sun, that he was confused with both. See Idolatry, Volume 2, page 373. Vossius utters here a greater occult truth than he suspected. The Hermes Sarameas of the Greeks is closely related to the Hindu Saram and Sarameya, the divine watchman who watches over the golden flock of stars and solar rays. In the clearer words of the commentary, the globe, propelled onward by the spirit of the earth and his 6 assistants, gets all its vital forces, life and powers through the medium of the 7 planetary Dhyanis from the spirit of the sun. They are his messengers of light and life. Like each of the 7 regions of the earth, each of the 7 firstborn, the primordial human groups, receives its light and life from its own especial dhyani, spiritually, and from the palace, house, the planet, of that dhyani physically. So with the 7 great races to be born on it. Note, science teaches that Venus receives from the Sun twice as much light and heat as the Earth. Thus the planet, precursor of the dawn and the twilight, the most radiant of all the planets, said to give the Earth 1/3 of the supply she receives, has 2 parts left for herself. This has an occult as well as an astronomical meaning. End of note. The first is born under the Sun, the second under Brihaspati, Jupiter, the third under Lohitanga, the fire-bodied Venus, or Shukra, the fourth under Soma, the Moon, our globe also, the 4th sphere being born under and from the Moon, and Sunny, Saturn, the Krura Lokana, evil-eyed, and the Ashita, the dark, the 5th under Buddha, Mercury. Note, as it is above, so it is below, is the fundamental axiom of occult philosophy. As the Logos is 7-fold, that is, throughout cosmos it appears as 7 logoi under 7 different forms, or as taught by learned Brahmins, each of these is the central figure of one of the 7 main branches of the ancient wisdom religion, and as the 7 principles which correspond to the 7 distinct states of prajna, or consciousness, are allied to 7 states of matter and the 7 forms of force, the division must be the same in all that concerns the earth. End of note. So also with man and every man in man, every principle that is, each gets its specific quality from its primary, the planetary spirit. Therefore every man is a septonate, or a combination of principles, each having its origin in a quality of that special dhyani. Every active power or force of the earth comes to her from one of the 7 lords. Light comes through Shukra, Venus, who receives a triple supply and gives 1/3 of it to the earth. Therefore the 2 are called twin sisters, but the spirit of the earth is subservient to the lord of Shukra. Our wise men represent the 2 globes, one over, the other under the double sign, the primeval svastika, bereft of its 4 arms, or the cross. The double sign is, as every student of occultism knows, the symbol of the male and the female principles in nature, of the positive and the negative, for the svastika is all that and much more. All antiquity, ever since the birth of astronomy, imparted to the 4th race by one of its divine kings of the divine dynasty, and also of astrology, represented Venus and its astronomical tables as a globe poised over a cross, and the earth as a globe under a cross. The esoteric meaning of this is earth fallen into generation, or into the production of its species through sexual union. But the later Western nations did not fail to give quite a different interpretation. They explained this sign through their mystics, guided by the light of the Latin Church, as meaning that our earth and all on it were redeemed by the cross, while Venus, otherwise Lucifer or Satan, was trampling upon it. Venus is the most occult, powerful, and mysterious of all the planets, the one whose influence upon and relation to the earth is most prominent. In exoteric Brahmanism, Venus, or Shukra, the male deity, is the son of Bhrigu, one of the Prajapati and a Vedic sage, and is Daitya Guru, or the priest-instructor of the primeval giants. The whole history of Shukra in the Puranas refers to the 3rd and to the 4th races. Note on Shukra, a male deity. In the esoteric philosophy it is male and female, or hermaphrodite, hence the bearded Venus in mythology. End of note. It is through Shukra that the double ones, the hermaphrodites of the 3rd root race, descended from the first sweat-born, says the commentary. Therefore it is represented under the symbol of a circle in diameter during the 3rd race, and during the 4th race with an added vertical line. This needs explanation. The diameter, when found isolated in a circle, stands for female nature, for the first ideal world, self-generated and self-impregnated by the universally diffused spirit of life, referring thus to the primitive root race also. It becomes androgynous as the races and all on earth develop into their physical forms, and the symbol is transformed into a circle with a diameter from which runs a vertical line, expressive of male and female, not separated as yet, the first and earliest Egyptian Tau, after which it becomes the cross, or male-female separated and fallen into generation. Venus, the planet, is symbolized by the sign of a globe over the cross, which shows it as presiding over the natural generation of man. The Egyptians symbolized Ankh, life, by the ansated cross, which is only another form of Venus, Isis, and meant esoterically that mankind and all animal life had stepped out of the divine spiritual circle and fallen into physical male and female generation. This sign from the end of the third race has the same phallic significance as the tree of life in Eden. Anuki, a form of Isis, is the goddess of life, and Ankh was taken by the Hebrews from the Egyptians and introduced by Moses, one learned in the wisdom of the priests of Egypt, with many other mystical words. The word Ankh in Hebrew, with a personal suffix, means my life, my being, which is the personal pronoun Anoki, from the name of the Egyptian goddess Anuki. Note: the ansated cross is the astronomical planetary sign of Venus, signifying the existence of parturient energy in the sexual sense, and this was one of the attributes of Isis, the mother of Eve, Hauva, or Mother Earth, and was so recognized among all the ancient peoples in one or another mode of expression, taken from a modern Kabbalistic manuscript. End of note. In one of the most ancient catechisms of southern India, Madras Presidency, the hermaphrodite goddess Ardhanari, see also Indian pantheon, has the ansated cross, the swastika, the male and female sign, right in the central part to denote the pre-sexual state of the third race. Vishnu, who is now represented with a lotus growing out of his navel, or the universe of Brahma evolving out of the central point Nara, is shown in one of the oldest carvings as double-sexed, Vishnu and Lakshmi, standing on a lotus leaf floating on the water, which water rises in a semicircle and pours through the swastika, the source of generation, or of the descent of man. Pythagoras calls Sucra-Venus the sole alter, the other sun. Of the 7 palaces of the sun, that of Lucifer-Venus is the third one in Christian and Jewish Kabbalah, the Zohar making of it the abode of Samael. According to the occult doctrine, this planet is our Earth's primary and its spiritual prototype. Hence, Sucra's car, Venus Lucifer's, is said to be drawn by an ogdoad of earth-born horses, while the steeds of the chariots of the other planets are different. Every sin committed on earth is felt by Usanas Sukra. The guru of the Daityas is the guardian spirit of the earth and men. Every change on Sukra is felt on and reflected by the earth. Sukra, or Venus, is thus represented as the preceptor of the Daityas, the giants of the fourth race who, in the Hindu allegory, obtained at one time the sovereignty of all the earth and defeated the minor gods. The Titans of the Western allegory are as closely connected with Venus Lucifer identified by later Christians with Satan. Therefore, as Venus, equally with Isis, was represented with cow's horns on her head, the symbol of mystic nature, and one that is convertible with and significant of the moon, since all these were lunar goddesses, the configuration of this planet is now placed by theologians between the horns of the mystic Lucifer. Note: Athenaeus shows that the first letter of Satan's name was represented in days of old by an arc and crescent, and some Roman Catholics, good and kind men, would persuade the public that it is in honor of Lucifer's crescent-like horns that Muslims have chosen the crescent for their national arms. Venus has always been identified, since the establishment of Roman Catholic dogmatism, with Satan and Lucifer, or the great dragon, contrary to all reason and logic. As shown by the symbologists and astronomers, the association between the serpent and the idea of darkness had an astronomical foundation. The position which the constellation of Draco at one time occupied showed that the great serpent was the ruler of the night. This constellation was formerly at the very center of the heavens and is so extensive that it was called the Great Dragon. Its body spreads over 7 signs of the zodiac, and Dupuy, who says Stanislav Wake, sees in the dragon of the Apocalypse a reference to the celestial serpent, remarks that it is not astonishing that a constellation so extended should be represented by the author of that book as a great dragon with 7 heads, who drew the third part of the stars from heaven and cast them to earth. Dupuy, tome 3, page 255. Only Dupuy never knew why Draco, once the pole star, the symbol of guide, guru and director, had been thus degraded by posterity. The gods of our fathers are our devils, says an Asiatic proverb. When Draco ceased to be the lodestar, the guiding sidereal divinity, it shared the fate of all the fallen gods. Set and Typhon was at one time, Bunsen tells us, a great god universally adored throughout Egypt, who conferred on the sovereigns of the 18th and 19th dynasties the symbols of life and power. But subsequently, in the course of the 20th dynasty, he is suddenly treated as an evil demon, insomuch that his effigies and name are obliterated on all the monuments and inscriptions that could be reached. The real cult reason will be given in these pages. End of note. It is owing to the fanciful interpretation of the archaic tradition which states that Venus changes simultaneously geologically with the Earth, that whatever takes place on the one takes place on the other, and that many and great were their common changes. It is for these reasons that Saint Augustine repeats it, applying the several changes of configuration, color, and even of the orbital paths to that theologically woven character of Venus-Lucifer. He even goes so far in his pious fancy as to connect the last changes of the planet with a Noachian and mythical deluge alleged to have taken place 1796 years before Christ. See City of God, 71, chapter 8. As Venus has no satellites, it is stated allegorically that Asbujit, this planet, adopted the Earth, the progeny of the Moon, who overgrew its parent and gave much trouble, a reference to the occult connection between the two. The regent of the planet Sukra loved his adopted child so well that he incarnated as Usanas and gave it perfect laws, which were disregarded and rejected in late ages. Note on the regent of the planet Sukra. Sukra is the son of Brigu, the great Rishi, and one of the 7 Prajapati, the founder of the race of Bhargavas, in which Parasurama is born. End of note. Another allegory in Harivansa is that Sukra went to Shiva asking him to protect his pupils, the Daityas and Asuras, from the fighting gods, and that to further his object he performed a yoga rite, imbibing the smoke of chaff with his head downwards for 1,000 years. This refers to the great inclination of the axis of Venus, amounting to 50 degrees, and to its being enveloped in eternal clouds, but it relates only to the physical constitution of the planet. It is with its regent, the informing Dhyan-Kocha, that occult mysticism has to deal. The allegory which states that for killing Sukra's mother, Vishnu was cursed by him to be reborn 7 times on the earth is full of occult philosophical meaning. It does not refer to Vishnu's avatars, since these number 9, the 10th being still to come, but to the races on earth. Venus, or Lucifer, also Sukra and Usanas, the planet, is the light-bearer of our earth in both its physical and mystic sense. The Christians knew it well in early times, since one of the earliest popes of Rome is known by his pontiff name as Lucifer. Every world has its parent star and sister planet. Thus Earth is the adopted child and the younger brother of Venus, but its inhabitants are of their own kind. All sentient, complete beings, full septenary men or higher beings, are furnished in their beginnings with forms and organisms in full harmony with the nature and state of the sphere they inhabit. Note, This is a flat contradiction of Swedenborg, who saw in the first earth of the astral world inhabitants dressed as are the peasants in Europe, and on the fourth, earth women clad as are the shepherdesses in a bal masqué. Even the famous astronomer Huygens labored under the mistaken idea that other worlds and planets have the same identical beings as those who live on our Earth, possessing the same figures, senses, brain power, arts, sciences, dwellings, and even to the same fabric for their wearing apparel. See Théorie du Monde. For the clear comprehension of the statement that the Earth is the progeny of the Moon, see Book 1, Stanza 6. End of note. The spheres of being, or centers of life, which are isolated nuclei, breeding their men and their animals, are numberless. Not one has any resemblance to its sister companion or to any other in its own special progeny. Note: this is a modern gloss. It is added to the old commentaries for the clear comprehension of those disciples who study esoteric cosmogony after having passed through Western learning. The earlier glosses are too redundant with adjectives and figures of speech to be easily assimilated. End of note. All have a double physical and spiritual nature. The nucleoles are eternal and everlasting. The nuclei periodical and finite. The nucleoles form part of the Absolute. They are the embrasures of that black impenetrable fortress, which is forever concealed from human or even Dianic sight. The nuclei are the light of the eternity escaping therefrom. It is that light which condenses into the forms of the Lords of Being, the first and the highest of which are collectively Jivatma or Pratyagatma, said figuratively to issue from Paramatma. It is the Logos of the Greek philosophers, appearing at the beginning of every new Manvantara. From these downwards, formed from the ever-consolidating waves of that light which becomes on the objective plane gross matter, proceed the numerous hierarchies of the creative forces, some formless, others having their own distinctive form, others again the lowest, elementals, having no form of their own, but assuming every form according to the surrounding conditions. Thus there is but one absolute upadhi, basis, in the spiritual sense, from, on, and in which are built, for manvateric purposes, the countless basic centers on which proceed the universal, cyclic, and individual evolutions during the active period. The informing intelligences, which animate these various centers of beings, are referred to indiscriminately by men beyond the great range, as the Manus, the Rishis, the Pitris, the Prajapati, and so on, and as the Jnani Buddhas, the Kohans, Melhas, fire gods, Bodhisattvas, and others on this side. Note on men beyond the great range. Beyond the great range means in our case India as being the trans-Himalayan region for the Cis-Himalayan region. End of note. Note on the Pitris. The term Pitris is used by us in these slokas to facilitate their comprehension, but it is not so used in the original stanzas, where they have distinct appellations of their own, besides being called fathers and progenitors. End of note. Note on Bodhisattvas. It is erroneous to take literally the worship of the human bodhisattvas, or Manjushri. It is true that exoterically the Mahayana school teaches adoration of these without distinction, and that Yuan Chang speaks of some principles of Buddha as being worshipped, but esoterically it is not the disciple or the learned Manjushri personally that receive honors, but the divine bodhisattvas and Jnani Buddhas that animated the human forms. Amilaka, as the Mongolians say. End of note. The truly ignorant call them gods, the learned profane the one God, and the wise, the initiates, honor in them only the manvanteric manifestations of that which neither our creators, the Kohans, nor their creatures can ever discuss or know anything about. The Absolute is not to be defined, and no mortal or immortal has ever seen or comprehended it during the periods of existence. The mutable cannot know the immutable, nor can that which lives perceive absolute life. Therefore, man cannot know higher beings than his own progenitors, nor shall he worship them, but he ought to learn how he came into the world. Number 7. The fundamental figure among all other figures in every national religious system, from cosmogony down to man, must have its raison d'être. It is found among the ancient Americans, as prominently as among the archaic Aryans and Egyptians. The question will be fully dealt with in the second part of this book. Meanwhile, a few facts may be given here. Says the author of the Sacred Mysteries among the Mayas and Quiches, 11,500 years ago. Note: the author of this work is Augustus Le Plongeon. He and his wife are well known in the United States for their untiring labors in Central America. It is they who discovered the sepulchre of the royal Cancún at Chichen Itza. The author seems to believe and to seek to prove that the esoteric learning of the Aryans and the Egyptians was derived from the Mayas. But although certainly coeval with Plato's Atlantis, the Mayas belonged to the fifth continent, which was preceded by Atlantis and Lemuria. End of note. Quote, 7 seems to have been the sacred number par excellence among all civilized nations of antiquity. Why? Each separate people has given a different explanation according to the peculiar tenets of their exoteric religion. That it was the number of numbers for those initiated into the sacred mysteries, there can be no doubt. Pythagoras calls it the vehicle of life containing body and soul, since it is formed of a quaternary, that is, wisdom and intellect, and of a trinity, or action and matter. The Emperor Julian, in Matrim, etc., expresses himself thus. Were I to touch upon the initiation into our sacred mysteries, which the Chaldees baptized, respecting the seven-rayed God, lighting up the soul through him, I should say things unknown to the rabble, very unknown, but well known to the blessed theurgists. Page 141. And who, acquainted with the Puranas, the Book of the Dead, the Zendavesta, the Assyrian tiles, and finally the Bible, and who has observed the constant occurrence of the number 7 in these records of people living from the remotest times unconnected and so far apart, can regard as a coincidence the following fact given by the same explorer of ancient mysteries. Speaking of the prevalence of 7 as a mystic number among the inhabitants of the western continent of America, he adds that it is not less remarkable, for, quote, it frequently occurs in the Popol Vuh. We find it besides in the 7 families said by Sahagun and Clavigero to have accompanied the mystical personage named Wotan, the reputed founder of the great city of Nakan, identified by some with Palenque. In the 7 caves, from which the ancestors of the Nahuatl are reported to have emerged. In the 7 cities of Cibola, described by Coronado and Nizza. In the 7 Antilles. In the 7 heroes who, we are told, escaped the deluge, unquote. Heroes, moreover, whose number is found the same in every deluge story, from the 7 rishis who were saved with Vaivashvata Manu down to Noah's Ark, into which beasts, fowls, and living creatures were taken by 7s. Thus we see the figures 1, 3, 5, 7 as perfect, because thoroughly mystic, numbers playing a prominent part in every cosmogony and evolution of living beings. In China, 1, 3, 5, and 7 are called celestial numbers in the canonical Book of Changes, Ji Qing, or transformation, as in evolution. The explanation of it becomes evident when one examines the ancient symbols. All these are based upon and start from the figures given from archaic manuscript in the Promo Book 1. The symbol of evolution and fall into generation or matter is reflected in the old Mexican sculptures or paintings, as it is in the Kabbalistic Sephiroth and the Egyptian Tao. Examine the Mexican manuscripts, British Museum, 9789. You will find in it a tree whose trunk is covered with the 10 fruits ready to be plucked by a male and female, one on each side of it, while from the top of the trunk 2 branches shoot horizontally to the right and left, thus forming a perfect T, Tau, that ends of the 2 branches, moreover each bearing a triple bunch with a bird, the bird of immortality, Atman, or the divine spirit, sitting between the 2 and thus making the 7th. This represents the same idea as the Sephirothal tree, 10 in all, yet when separated from its upper triad, leaving 7. These are the celestial fruits, the 10, born out of the two invisible male and female seeds, making up the 12, or the dodecahedron of the universe. The mystic system contains the central point, the 3 or triangle, the 5 or five-pointed star, and the 7 or again the triangle in the square and the synthesizing point in the interlaced double triangles. This for the world of the archetypes. The phenomenal world receives its culmination and the reflex of all in man. Therefore he is the mystic square in his metaphysical aspect, the tetractys, and becomes the cube on the creative plane. His symbol is the cube unfolded, and 6 becoming 7, or the 3 crossways, the female and 4 vertically, and this is man, the culmination of the deity on earth, whose body is the cross of flesh, on, through, and in which he is ever crucifying and putting to death the divine Logos or his higher self. The universe, says every philosophy and cosmogony, hath a ruler, rulers collectively, set over it, which is called the Word, Logos. The fabricating spirit is its queen, which two are the first power after the one. These are the spirit and nature, which two form our illusory universe. The two inseparables remain in the universe of ideas so long as it lasts, and then merge back into Parabrahm, the one ever changeless. The spirit, whose essence is eternal, one and self-existent, emanates a pure ethereal light, a dual light not perceptible to the elementary senses, in the Puranas, in the Bible, in the Sefer Jezaira, the Greek and Latin hymns, in the Book of Hermes, in the Chaldean Book of Numbers, in the esotericism of Lao Tse, everywhere. In the Kabbalah, which explains the secret meaning of Genesis, this light is the dual man or the androgyne, rather the sexless angels, whose generic name is Adam Kadmon. It is they who complete man, whose ethereal form is emanated by other divine but far lower beings, who solidify the body with clay or the dust of the ground, an allegory indeed, but as scientific as any Darwinian evolution, and more true. The author of the Source of Measures says that the foundation of the Kabbalah and its mystic books is made to rest upon the 10 Sephiroth, which is a fundamental truth. See Masonic Review, Cincinnati, June 1886, article Kabbalah number 6. He shows these 10 Sephiroth, or the 10 numbers, wherein the circle is the naught, its vertical diameter is the first or primal one, the word or logos, from which springs the series of the other numbers up to 9, the limit of the digits. The 10 is the first divine manifestation, containing every possible power of exact expression of proportion. See Isis Unveiled, Volume 2, pages 300 et sequens, for a proof of the antiquity of the decimal system of figures. By this Kabbalistic speculation we are taught that the Sephiroth were the numbers or emanations of the heavenly light, figures 20612 to 6561. They were the 10 words, the Rim, 41224, the light, of which they were the flux, was the heavenly man, the Adam Kadm, the 144 to 144, and the light by the New Testament a covenant, or 41224, created God, just as by the Old Testament God, Achim, 31415, creates light, 20612 to 6561. Now there are 3 kinds of light in occultism, as in the Kabbalah. 1, the abstract and absolute light, which is darkness. 2, the light of the manifested, unmanifested, called by some the Logos. And 3, the latter light reflected in the Yankochans, the minor logoi, the Elohim collectively, who in their turn shed it on the objective universe. But in the Kabbalah, re-edited and carefully adjusted to fit the Christian tenets by the Kabbalists of the 13th century, the 3 lights are described as 1, the clear and penetrating, and that of Jehovah; 2, reflected light; and 3, light in the abstract. This light, abstractly taken in a metaphysical or symbolical sense, is Alchim, Elohim God, while the clear penetrating light is Jehovah. The light of Alchim belongs to the world in general, in its allness and general fullness, but the light of Jehovah is that pertaining to the chiefest production, man, whom this light penetrated and made. The author of the Source of Measures pertinently refers the reader to Inman's Ancient Faiths Embodied in Ancient Names, Volume 2, page 648. There, an engraving of the Vesica Piscis, Mary and the female emblem, copied from a rosary of the Blessed Virgin, printed at Venice 1542, and therefore, as Inman remarks, with a license from the Inquisition, consequently orthodox, will show the reader what the Latin Church understood by this penetrating power of light and its effects. How sadly disfigured, applied as they were to the grossest anthropomorphic conceptions, have become under Christian interpretation the noblest and grandest as the most exalted ideas of deity of the Eastern philosophy. The occultists call this light Daivi Prakriti in the East, and light of Christos in the West. It is the light of the Logos, the direct reflection of the ever unknowable on the plane of universal manifestation. But here is the interpretation thereof given by the modern Christians from the Kabbalah, as declared by the author just cited, quote, "To the fullness of the world in general, with its chiefest content, man, the term Elohim Jehovah applies." In extract from the Zohar, the Reverend Dr. Kessel, a Kabbalist, to prove that Kabbalah sets forth the doctrine of the Trinity, among other things, says, Jehovah is Elohim, Alchim. By 3 steps, God, Alchim, and Jehovah become the same. And though separated each and together, they are of the same one. Unquote. Similarly, Vishnu becomes the sun, the visible symbol of the impersonal deity. Vishnu is described as striding through the 7 regions of the universe in 3 steps, but with the Hindus this is an exoteric account, a surface tenet and an allegory, while the Kabbalists give it out as the esoteric and final meaning. But to proceed, quote, "Now light," explains the author, "as shown is 20612 to 6561, as the proper enunciation of the integral and numerical relation of diameter to circumference of a circle. God, Alchim, that is 3.1415 to 1, a modified form of the above, is the reduction of this so as to obtain a standard unit 1 as the basis in general of all calculation and all mensuration. But for the production of animal life, and for a special time measure or the lunar year, that influence which causes conception and embryotic development, the numbers of Jehovah measure, man even Jehovah measure, meaning 113 to 355 have to be specialized. Note, see Source of Measures, pages 276 et sequens, Appendix 7. But this last ratio is but a modified form of light, or 20612 to 6561, as a pi value, being only a variation of the same. That is, 20612 to 6561 is 31415 to 1, or Alchim, or God, and in such a manner that one can be made to flow into and be derived from the other, and these are the 3 steps by which the unity and sameness can be shown of the divine names. That is, the 2 are but variations of the same ratio, meaning that of pi. The object of this comment is to show the same measuring use for the Kabbalah as was employed in the 3 covenants of the Bible and in the symbols of Masonry, as just noticed. First, then, the Sephiroth are described as light, that is, they themselves are a function of indeed the same as the manifestation of Ein Sof, and they are so from the fact that light represents the ratio of 20612 to 6561 as part of the words, Dibrim 41224, or as to the word Debar 206, which equals 10 cubits. Light is so much the burden of the Kabbalah in explaining the Sephiroth that the most famous book on the Kabbalah is called Zohar, or Light. In this we find expressions of this kind. The infinite was entirely unknown and diffused no light before the luminous point violently broke through into vision. When he first assumed the form of the crown of the first Sephirah, he caused 9 splendid lights to emanate from it, which, shining through it, diffused a bright light in all directions. That is, these 9 with his 1, which was the origin, as above, of the 9, together made the 10. That is, the sacred 10 numbers or Sephiroth or Jod, and these numbers were the light. Just as in the Gospel of St. John, God, Alchim 314152-1, was that light, 20612-26561, by which light all things were made. Unquote. In Sefer Jezira, or numbers of creations, the whole process of evolution is given out in numbers. In its 32 paths of wisdom, the number 3 is repeated 4 times, and the number 4 5 times. Therefore, the wisdom of God is contained in numbers, Sephirim or Sephiroth. For Sefer, or Esfra when unvoweled, means to cipher. And therefore, also we find Plato stating that the deity geometrizes in fabricating the universe. The Kabbalistic book, the Sefer Jezira, opens with the statement of the hidden wisdom of Alchim in Sephirim, that is, the Elohim in the Sephiroth. In 32 paths, hidden wisdom established Yahweh, Tzabaut, Elohim of Israel, Alchim of life, El of grace and mercy, exalted, uplifted dweller on high, and King of everlasting, and his name holy in 3 Sephirim, meaning Besfer, Vesfer, Visifer. This comment sets forth the hidden wisdom of the original text by hidden wisdom, that is, by the use of words carrying a special set of numbers and a special phraseology, which will set forth the very explanatory system which we find to fit so accurately in the Hebrew Bible. In setting forth his schemes to enforce it, and to finish out his detailed exposition in general postulate, meaning the one word Sephrim, Sephiroth, of the number Jezira, the author explains the separation of this word into 3 subordinate ones, a play upon a common word, the Sefer, or number. Unquote. The Prince Al-Khazari says to the rabbi in the book Al-Khazari by Yehuda Halevi, translated by Dr. D. Cassell, quote, I wish now that thou wouldest impart to me some of the chiefest or leading principles of natural philosophy, which, as thou sayest, were in the former times worked out by them, the ancient wise ones. To which the rabbi makes answer, to such principles appertains the number of creation of our race father Abraham, that is, Abram and Abraham, or numbers 41224 and 41252. He then says that this book of number treats of the teaching of alchimness and oneness through dibrim, meaning the numbers of the word words. That is, it teaches the use of the ratio 31415 to 1 through 41224, which last, in the description of the Ark of the Covenant, was divided into 2 parts by 2 tables of stone, on which these dibrim, or 41224, were written or engraved, or 20612 by 2. He then comments on these 3 subordinately used words and takes care as to one of them to make the comment, and Alchim 31415-1 said, Let there be light, 20612-26561. Unquote. The rabbi says, it teaches the alchimness 31415 and oneness, the diameter to alchim through words, dibrim 41224, by which on the one side there is infinite expression in heterogeneous creations, and on the other final harmonic tendency to oneness, which, as everyone knows, is the mathematical function of pi of the schools which measures and weighs and numbers the stars of heaven, and yet resolves them back into the final oneness of the universe through words. And their final accord perfects itself in that oneness that ordains them. Book of Al-Khazari. That is, the rabbi, in his first comment, leaves the jod, or I, out of one of the words, whereas afterwards he restores it again. If we take the values of those subordinate words, we find them to be 340, 340, 346. We find them to be 340, 340, 346. Together these are 1026. And the division of the general word into these has been to produce these numbers, which, by Chimura, may be changed in various ways for various purposes. unquote, in Kabbalah. The reader is asked to turn to stanza 4, book 1, and its fourth commentary to find that the 3, 4, 7, and the thrice 7, or 1065, the number of Jehovah, is the number of the 21 Prajapati mentioned in the Mahabharata, or the 3 Sephrim, words in cipher figures. And this comparison between the creative powers of archaic philosophy and the anthropomorphic creator of exoteric Judaism, since the esotericism shows its identity with the secret doctrine, will lead the student to perceive and discover that in truth Jehovah is but a lunar and generation god. See Book 1, Part 2, Deus Lunus. It is a fact well known to every conscientious student of the Kabbalah. The deeper he dives into it, the more he feels convinced that unless the Kabbalah, or what is left of it, is read by the light of the Eastern esoteric philosophy, its study leads only to the discovery that on the lines traced by exoteric Judaism and Christianity, the monotheism of both is nothing more exalted than ancient astrolatry, now vindicated by modern astronomy. The Kabbalists never cease to repeat that primal intelligence can never be understood. It cannot be comprehended, nor can it be located, therefore it has to remain nameless and negative. Hence the Ein Sof, the unknowable and the unnameable, which, as it could not be made manifest, was conceived to emanate manifesting powers. It is then with its emanations alone that human intellect has to and can deal. Christian theology, having rejected the doctrine of emanations and replaced them with direct conscious creations of angels and the rest out of nothing, now finds itself hopelessly stranded between supernaturalism or miracle and materialism. An extracosmic God is fatal to philosophy. An intracosmic deity, that is, spirit and matter inseparable from each other, is a philosophical necessity. Separate them, and that which is left is a gross superstition under a mask of emotionalism. But why geometrize, as Plato has it? Why represent these emanations under the form of an immense arithmetical table? The question is well answered by the author just cited. His remarks are quoted in Part 2, section The Theogony of the Creative Gods. Mental perception, he says, to become physical perception, must have the cosmic principle of light, and by this our mental circle must become visible through light, or, for its complete manifestation, the circle must be that of physical visibility, or light itself. Such conceptions, thus formulated, became the groundwork of the philosophy of the divine manifesting in the universe. This is philosophy. It is otherwise when we find the rabbi in Al-Khazari saying that under Isfr is to be understood calculation and weighing of created bodies, for the calculation by means of which a body must be constructed in harmony or symmetry, by which it must be in construction rightly arranged and made to correspond to the object in design, consists at last in number, extension, mass, weight, coordinate relation of movements. Then harmony of music must consist altogether by number, that is, sifr. By sipr, sfr, is to be understood the words of Alchim, whereunto joins or adapts itself the design of the frame or form of construction. For example, it was said, "Let light be." The work became as the words were spoken, that is, as the numbers of the work came forth. This is materializing the spiritual without scruple. But the Kabbalah was not always so well adapted to anthropomonotheistic conceptions. Compare this with any of the 6 schools of India. For instance, in Kapila's Sankhya philosophy, unless allegorically speaking, Purusha mounts on the shoulders of Prakriti, the latter remains irrational, while the former remains inactive without her. Therefore nature in man must become a compound of spirit and matter before he becomes what he is, and the spirit latent in matter must be awakened to life and consciousness gradually. The monad has to pass through its mineral, vegetable, and animal forms before the light of the Logos is awakened in the animal man. Therefore, till then, the latter cannot be referred to as man, but has to be regarded as a monad imprisoned in ever-changing forms. Evolution, not creation, by means of words is recognized in the philosophies of the East, even in their exoteric records. Ex oriente lux. Even the name of the first man in the Mosaic Bible had its origin in India, Professor Max Muller's negation notwithstanding. The Jews got their Adam from Chaldea, and Adam-Adami is a compound word, and therefore a manifold symbol, and proves the occult dogmas. There is no place for philological disquisitions, but the reader may be reminded that the words ad and adi mean in Sanskrit the first, in Aramean one, adad the only one, in Assyrian father, whence akkad or father creator. Note: the appellation Akkad or Akkadians is of the same class as Adm, Hava, Eve, Ad and Eden. Akkad meaning son of Ad, like the sons of Ad in ancient Arabia. Adad, the only one and the first, was the Adon or lord of Syria and consort of Adargat or Astert, the Syrian goddess. And Gan Eden, Eden, or Gandunia, was Babylonia and Mesopotamia. In Assyrian, Ak meant creator, the letter K pronounced Ka gutturally. According to Swedenborg's mysticism, Adam was not a man, but a church, within brackets question mark, of primitive light. In the Vedas, Aditi is the primitive light, the Akasha of the phenomenal world. End of note. And once the statement is found correct, it becomes rather difficult to confine Adam to the Mosaic Bible alone, and to see therein simply a Jewish name. Read part 2 of this volume, section Adam-Adami. There is frequent confusion in the attributes and genealogies of the gods in their theogonies, as given to the world by the half-initiated writers, Brahmanical and biblical, the alpha and the omega of the records of that symbolical science. Yet there could be no such confusion made by the earliest nations, the descendants and pupils of the divine instructors, for both the attributes and the genealogies were inseparably linked with cosmogonical symbols, the gods being the life and animating soul principle of the various regions of the universe. Nowhere and by no people was speculation allowed to range beyond those manifested gods. The boundless and infinite unity remained with every nation a virgin forbidden soil, untrodden by man's thought, untouched by fruitless speculation. The only reference made to it was the brief conception of its diastolic and systolic property, of its periodical expansion or dilatation and contraction. In the universe, with all its incalculable myriads of systems and worlds disappearing and reappearing in eternity, the anthropomorphized powers or gods, their souls, had to disappear from view with their bodies, the breath returning to the eternal bosom which exhales and inhales them, says our catechism. Ideal nature, the abstract space in which everything in the universe is mysteriously and invisibly generated, is the same female side of procreative power in nature in the Vedic as in every other cosmogony. Aditi is Sephira, and the Sophia Akamot of the Gnostics, and Isis, the Virgin Mother of Horus. In every cosmogony, behind and higher than the creative deity, there is a superior deity, a planner, an architect, of whom the creator is but the executive agent. And still higher, over and around, within and without, there is the unknowable and the unknown, the source and cause of all these emanations. It thus becomes easy to account for the reason why Adam-Adami is found in the Chaldean scripture, certainly earlier than in the Mosaic books. In Assyrian, Ad is the father, and in Aramean, Ad is one, and Adad the only one, while Ak is in Assyrian, creator. Thus, Adam-Ak-Kadmon became Adam-Kadmon in the Kabbalah, Zohar, meaning as it did the one son of the divine father or the creator, for the words and meant at one time in nearly every language the divine or the deity. Thus Adam-Kadmon and Adam-Adami came to mean the first emanation of the father-mother or divine nature, and literally the first divine one, and it is easy to see that Ad-Argat, or Astert, the Syrian goddess, the consort of Adon, the Lord God of Syria, or the Jewish Adonai, and Venus, Isis, Ishtar, Milita, Eve, etc., etc., are identical with the Aditi and Vach of the Hindus. They are all the mothers of all living and of the gods. On the other hand, cosmically and astronomically, all the male gods became at first sun gods, then theologically the sons of righteousness, and the Logoi, all symbolized by the sun. Note: Adam Jehovah, Brahma, and Mars are in one sense identical. They are all symbols for primitive or initial generative powers for the purposes of human procreation. Adam is red, and so also are Brahma, Virai, and Mars, God and planet. Water is the blood of the earth. Therefore, all these names are connected with earth and water. It takes earth and water to create a human soul, says Moses. Mars is identical with Kartikeya, god of war, in one sense, which god is born of the sweat of Shiva, Karmaya, and the earth. In the Mahabharata, he is shown as born without the intervention of a woman, and he is also called Lohita, the red, like Adam and the other first men. Hence, the author of The Source of Measures is quite right in thinking that Mars and all the other gods of like attributes, being the god of war and of bloodshed, was but a secondary idea flowing out of the primary one of shedding of blood in conception for the first time. Hence Jehovah became later a fighting god, Lord of hosts, and one who commands war. He is the aggressive Zod, or Cain by permutation, who slew his female, quote, brother, unquote, whose blood crieth from the ground, the earth having opened her mouth to receive the blood. In Genesis chapter 3, end of note. They are all protogonoi, the firstborn, and mikroprospoi. With the Jews, Adam-Kadmon was the same as Athamas, Tamas, or the Adonis of the Greeks, the one with and of his father, the father becoming during the later races Helios, as Apolloconeus, for instance, who was the son-born. Osiris, Ormazd, and so on, were all followed by and found themselves transformed later on into still more earthly types, such as Prometheus, the crucified on Mount Caibe, Hercules, and so many others, sun gods and heroes, until all of them came to have no better significance than phallic symbols. Note on Apollocarneus. Apollocarneus is certainly a Greek transformation from the Hindu Krishna Karna. Karna means radiant from Karna, a ray, and Carneus, which was a title of Apollo with the Celts, as with the Greeks, meant sun-born. End of note. In the Zohar it is said, man was created by the Sephiroth, Elohim Javeh also, and they engendered by common power the earthly Adam. Therefore in Genesis the Elohim say, Behold, man is become as one of us. But in Hindu cosmogony or creation, Brahma Prajapati creates Viraj and the Rishis spiritually. Therefore the latter are distinctly called the mind-born sons of Brahma, and this specified mode of engendering precluded every idea of phallicism, at any rate in the earlier human nations. This instance well illustrates the respective spirituality of the two nations.